Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Robert Fuentes, and I want to welcome you to the latest in our series of Eno Center for Transportation webinars. Today's we are doing in partnership with TransDev, and today we will present a fast-changing mobility landscape, a discussion of transit leaders' top priorities. As folks in the call I'm sure know, throughout the United States and around the world, cities, states, and metro areas are going through a period of profound change, and this transition in turn is having enormous impacts on public transit. Technological, political, institutional changes, all these things are affecting how we travel, how information is shared, how public agencies manage and invest in transit, and how private firms engage. So to better understand these trends, TransDev, an international transportation operator, recently commissioned a survey to gauge the challenges and opportunities that transit agencies face. Eno independently analyzed that survey data and prepared an accompanying report, which you can access on our website, enotrans.org, or on transdevna.com. This does not report on every element of the survey, but it's organized around several key themes that emerged as a result of this analysis. So what we're going to do here on the phone today is to talk through basically that report and the survey that was commissioned. And for those listening in, you are encouraged to submit questions and comments through the questions function on the webinar website. You don't have to wait until the speakers are done to submit questions. You can submit at any time. So as mentioned, I'm Robert Fuentes. I am the President and CEO of the Eno Center for Transportation, and I'm going to share duties on this call with Ruth Oddie from TransDev. Take it over, Ruth.
Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining us. As Rob said, we operate public transportation systems all over the world in thousands of cities in 20 countries, some 200 in the U.S., and we partnered last fall with a global market research firm named Ipsos to survey transit leaders in 5 countries. Today, we're going to share with you, obviously, just the U.S. results, but there were some really interesting similarities around the world. Our goal was to interview leaders of transit authorities to understand the issues they're facing and what they're thinking about doing and how they're planning to address the change in the next 3-year horizon. So as we give responses, that's kind of the mindset that the people being interviewed were in. Why'd we do this? Well, as Rob was saying, obviously we're at a time of tremendous change, cultural and demographic changes, and a huge change in the rising expectations of passengers. Since the advent of Uber and Lyft, we all expect maps and real-time information all the way through, and et cetera. In addition, the disruptive technology, which opens opportunities, but also will bring in new competition and is already doing so. The ever-present economic changes and challenges of our industry, and of course the decline in ridership over the last few years, which is a concern to all of us.
So what we want to do here on this call today is a brief agenda. We're going to discuss the challenges that are faced by transit agencies. We're going to talk about the key priorities that we learned from the survey results, and then a set of conclusions and next steps. So the first question was an open-ended question about the challenges that transit agencies face. And from this, it's clear that transit agency leaders are both anxious and optimistic about new transportation technology, but are definitely concerned about the big issues of the day, things like falling ridership, funding challenges, workforce challenges. All these things do seem to be weighing heavy on the minds of transit leaders. They clearly recognize that there are new actors, there are potential competitors, and that they need to adapt in a rapidly digitizing world. But overall, I think it's clear from reading these survey results that they are optimistic about the future and the key role that transit is going to continue to play in the urban mobility landscape.
Okay, so let us take you through the number one challenge. 61% thought it might actually be higher than that. Identified the lack of resources and funding as the thing that most keeps them up at night, particularly in light of the need to improve our systems and our transit offerings. So that the coupling of that was a pressing concern. A small percent, but noteworthy, spoke about challenges related to the workforce. As you all know, our workforce is aging, and it's quite significant. A recent APTA study indicated that 90% of bus operators and 75% of mechanics are over 40 and, heading rapidly to 50. So these two were some of the key challenges. And here's a summary that Rob's going to take you through of a broader look at their challenges.
Yeah, we created this word cloud with this open-ended question to capture the key terms that were in that open-ended question. Clearly, you can see from this word cloud things like funding and ridership remain top concerns for transit agency leaders. Of course, there's a big cluster of things around technology, TNCs, automation, things like that. But there's also interesting things in there. There's a lot of attention to first mile, last mile, the FMLM note there. Things like workforce, things like sprawl, all of these things became very clearly important to transit agency leaders in this response. So the next thing we're going to do is talk about the three key priorities for transit agencies, beginning with passenger experience.
So we have a few slides in a row here, and they're really interesting. First of all, an overwhelming number of transit leaders indicated, 98%, that they are committed to improve the passenger experience, the step-by-step frustrations and things that can, alienate a customer as they use public transit. 93% explained that as a very sincere commitment to deepen the customer service culture of their organizations, focusing on courtesy of staff, empathy of staff, ability to relate to passengers who are having issues, etc. And 67% said that they wanted to focus on improving the seamlessness of customer trips, of end-to-end journeys, with better focus on connections, better modal integration, just, again, reducing hassle or perceived hassle that can take place as a customer goes through the various steps of a journey. Okay, more on the passenger experience. Very interesting that a high percent want to increase the diversity of payment channels, of ways that passengers can purchase tickets and passes. In addition, some 60% are committed to redesigning their bus service, their routing, their whole sort of service design. And that included, for half of that number, improving service gaps, frequency, and expanding hours to make transit more convenient to stem off ridership declines. In addition, very interesting here, a high percentage of them, 80%, indicated that they want to find people or hire people in their organizations to work in data science, to do analytics on customers, to improve their insight and knowledge of customers. And to do so, 71% said they were interested in acquiring open data and also paying for data so that they can understand passengers better and address their needs.
And all this matters today because a lot of different ways that transit agencies are starting to address these issues of the passenger experience. A lot of the agencies, the majority in fact, plan to redesign their bus networks to better reflect the new ways that people are traveling and the development patterns in cities and metros across the country. So a lot of these bus network lines were laid out many, many years ago before development patterns changed and because they weren't connecting people from where they are to where they want to go. So metro areas like Seattle, Baltimore, Houston are famously redesigning their entire bus networks using new technologies and new tools to optimize the system and then provide better customer service. In fact, the recent bus redesign in Columbus, Ohio, put 100,000 more residents within a close 5-minute walk to buses that arrive very frequently, and about 110,000 more jobs. So it does seem clear from looking at this data that other agencies may be picking up on this trend. There was only a very small amount that said they're not planning to use new kinds of tools and urban planning principles to start to redevelop their bus systems and better provide customer service. So the next thing, the next key priority for transit agencies was exploring new mobility systems.
So first we're going to take a look at the actions and their strong commitment to increase ridership, which you can see here. That's in response to the 3% decline in 2016 to 17, and the year before that there was a decline as well in ridership, which is of course a major concern for our industry. So in response to that, here are some of the things that they are thinking about. First, almost 90% want to provide an all-in-one platform for passengers, meaning one app or one mobile site where people can find a trip planner, get real-time information, get mobile ticketing, service alerts, like a high level of information through their trips. And of that, an additional 70% remain committed to finding a way to work with TNCs to provide ride-hailing or ride-sharing services. So continuing on with new technology, 68% said that they, as Rob referred to earlier, are interested in really diving into first last mile options, considering where, how, pricing, service levels, times of day, picking people up at their home and taking them to a transit stop or a hub or a transfer point. That's the kind of explorations that are going on now in many cities around the world. Of course, equity considerations loom very, very highly in these discussions, because there's, given our ethic in this business to make sure that that principle is always honored, then how to plan the cost of these, how to operate them, how much they need to be subsidized, and how to make sure that that these services don't just end up in middle income or upper income neighborhoods. That would not work. So I think one of the things that surprised us the most along these lines is the high degree of interest in mobility as a service. As you all probably know, this is one platform that would give passengers a single place to plan, book, and pay for mobility services. That would include all the services in a region, no matter who manages them. So it would be public transit, carpooling, scooters, bikes, ride sharing, carpooling, all the ways to get around a city. And what was interesting is that while there's a high degree of interest, only 27% are in current conversations about this. And there's, of course, a lot more information coming out and technology companies offering more options now. 72% of those who are thinking about it think that they would have to have a partner, that they would need a private sector partner or a tech company as a partner to develop and manage the system, that this would not be something that the transit agency could do in-house. And finally, the last part of the new mobility aspect of this survey was about autonomous vehicles. So about half of transit authorities indicate they have high levels of interest in testing these options. And you can see here the list of the kinds of places where they would consider that they might work the best. And these are the kinds of places where testing is going on now. And of course, there's open road testing as well going on. But within universities, airports, planned communities, downtown pedestrian areas, a replacement for bus service in off-peak hours, those are some of the probably normal kinds of things that they were considering, or maybe predictable places they were considering. Okay.
So we'll just end here with just a couple of conclusions that we included in the report from the analysis of the data. Clearly, transit agency leaders are concerned about the things that you would expect them to be concerned about: funding, declining ridership, and workforce needs. But there's also a clear focus that we found from these transit agency leaders that in order to address these challenges, they have to focus on their core mission, which is better service to the customers. Now, it may sound obvious and it may sound intuitive to a lot of folks, but I think it was very encouraging and refreshing to hear that is still the number one priority for them. They're also committed to being active participants in new mobility and figuring out ways to harness new technology to improve that passenger experience. As we mentioned, there is some apprehension about technology, some concern that they may not have the right staff and workforce challenges to be able to take advantage of the new technology that exists, but clearly there's some optimism that's going to have a big role to play in improving the customer service. Clearly, transit agencies are also then open to partnerships with the private sector in order to help them deal with some of these new technology trends, things like transit software and operations, in order to help them navigate in this new landscape, in this new world of public transit. So let me go ahead and stop there, and again, thank Ruth for the discussion and TransDev for the survey data, and go ahead and encourage you to send in questions using the questions function on the website. We will go ahead and start to address some of those right now. So you don't have to wait until we're done to submit your questions. Let me just start off with one here. Let me address this to Ruth. So you mentioned that the high degree of interest in mobility as a service from the survey results were maybe surprising how the high number that it was. Can you describe a little bit more about what it means to partner with a transit agency, with a private firm on things like mobility as a service?
Well, if you take there are cities where there are multiple transit agencies, for example, right? So from the standpoint of a consumer, a passenger, they want to see all their options to get around any part of the city. So that means that, for example, in the few cities where mobility as a service precursors have happened, the transit agencies in that city all need to collaborate to, with data and with agreements and with, approving the interface and the user experience and all that. So that's one major reality of this, right? Because for passengers to stay only within the territory of one transit agency doesn't serve them. It has to be across the metro area. So that's one real challenge.
That's great. The couple of folks are asking about the bus redesigns and what may be happening with bus redesigns across the country. I do think it's clear that that there are some big examples, and the ones in Houston and Seattle do get a lot of attention. But as we travel around the country and talk to folks in cities and metros, there's obviously some interest in all of these places to learn from what those major metros have done, and they may not be doing wholesale redesigns to that same scale, but trying to figure out how the bus networks need to adapt in light of these changing times, these new technologies, is a very pervasive theme all across the country. So what we may be seeing is folks trying to figure out, well, what does the new mobility landscape look like, and what is the role of bus in that right now? Let me address a couple of others. There's a bunch of questions here about kind of the overall survey results, and we'll direct this to you too, and I can answer it as well. But what do you think, was there anything particularly surprising in here? Was there anything in here that you didn't expect to find and found, or vice versa, anything that you didn't expect to find and found, or the way around? Anything that surprised you in the survey data?
I would say that I was very heartened by a 98% indication of a serious commitment to improve the passenger experience. Recently, DePaul University did a major study and found that the transit agencies most likely to lose ridership are those where the passenger experience is not that great. And they found, in fact, a 5 times more likelihood that significant numbers of passengers would go to an Uber or Lyft if connections aren't tight and buses are late and there are issues or overcrowding or whatever, or not enough frequency. So knowing that is going on and we're declining in ridership, a serious commitment to improving the passenger experience at every step is, I think that was very heartening to me, because I feel like it's one area where we really need to be. Yeah,
agreed. And it sounds intuitive, right? Of course, that's where they should be focused. But I think for a long time we weren't focused on that. And so it was encouraging to see that that's something that transit agencies
so dominant, right? 98%
yes, indeed.
Indicated, right?
In fact, I would have thought that just given, especially where we are perched here in Washington, and as we go around and talk to folks around the country, that the funding issues, which were certainly prominent in here, I thought that would have been the only thing that folks cared about. It's just because it seems so pervasive that it actually is a piece of it, and there's no doubt about it. But perhaps it's because transit agencies are starting to raise their own money. You see state legislatures starting to show a bigger interest in transit. We see folks at the ballot box approving measures and giving more money for transit. So maybe the funding challenges certainly aren't being solved, but maybe they are being addressed some way, which is ameliorating some of those big challenges.
Well, I think another really interesting thing about the level of interest in new mobility is that when you think about the ways that the culture of some of our transit agencies needs to be more agile, more fast-moving, the way procurement may need to change, so that you can take on these new kinds of services and new types of data-based analytics and all. It's in other words, it will require new positions, new thinking, new agility, and the fact that the interest was so high, indicates to me there's a recognition.
Yeah, I think that's right, for sure.
And I think another interesting thing at the level of MaaS is that, you can study, for example, a company that's a subsidiary of ours did this for Toronto, and 14 or so transit agencies got together and collaborated. And the kind of coordination that takes ended up bringing many other benefits to the relationships between those transit authorities and a commitment to the end passenger, which is ultimately a good thing.
Yeah, indeed. Now, I know this was a result for domestic audiences. Do we know anything about the international? Do we think the international results would look similar? You're an international firm.
Yeah, we have them. Yeah, remarkable similarities. remarkable similarities. I mean, I think overall, some of the transit agencies overseas were more likely to be in the bike business and be focused on those things than the U.S., but on all the big pieces, very, very similar. Australia, New Zealand, Sweden, Canada, and U.S. were the 5 countries that were included in the survey.
Got it. So what do we do with all this information that we have now? So what does an organization like TransDev, a company like TransDev, do with this information that we have now? A comprehensive survey, really interesting results, really good insights. What does the company do with it now?
Well, I guess I felt like we hope that these results would encourage people who are change makers in their organizations to be able to use this data and show kind of what leaders are thinking about and try to mobilize new initiatives and support them in their effort to get funding, to get headcount, to get, the tech resources they need, that just having a sense of the mindset, they could say, well, are we in that mindset? Do we want to be in that mindset? Do we believe in these things here? What are our priorities? So we hoped that it would help our clients and the industry. I don't know, it's just sometimes really useful to see what other people are thinking, and especially when it was so clear, so clearly laid out as
Indeed.
top priorities.
Yeah, and for us at Eno, I think that it's very similar. There are things that we know and suspect, right? But there's an awful lot that we don't know, right? So there's a bunch of questions in here that I'm just going to kind of collect around the ridership declines, and what do we know from this data about what's responsible for transit ridership declines. I don't think the data really shows us that, but it starts to help this larger conversation that we're having across the country. We think that in some places it may be the result of new options. It may be the result of, we saw some data in California where folks are driving more. It may be the result of different workforce challenges. So there's a whole lot that I still think we haven't quite answered. This data and the survey results will help inform that. But I don't think it answers the question, and it probably wasn't meant to answer that kind of question.
Good point. I mean, I think also the economy's been good, so it's easier for people to lease a car or buy a car, right?
Right.
There's 2 or 3 really major studies trying to go underneath that, but that wasn't necessarily our goal here.
Right, which then leads to a broader question of, well, if car ownership may be increasing or driving may be increasing because the economy is growing, but what's the role of transit in that? And I think those are the questions we're going to be starting to answer. Now, one thing, of course, I think folks are very interested, judging from these questions. They're all looking for more questions and more information. Of course, as comprehensive as this was, people want more, more details in a lot of cases. But one thing, I think we've kind of addressed this. There's a lot of things in here about the priorities, right? So you ask people, what are they most interested in? But when you really get down to it, what's interesting is how the transit agency leaders are prioritizing their challenges and their opportunities. And clearly one priority was around improving the customer service. Anything else you think that's stuck out as in terms of where they want to focus their attention in terms of challenges and opportunities?
Oh, well, what you said earlier in terms of, just look at those statistics out of Columbus, right? Very concretely, redesign the network so that how many more people are within a 5-minute walk of a transit option that comes every 15 minutes, right? I mean, that's how we're going to attract more people. And obviously, there's plenty of places where our routes have a bus every 45 minutes because there hasn't been funding to do more than that. But mobilizing with a redesign like that to try to get your city to give you more money because you can make specific promises like that is inspiring. Yeah,
indeed. Right? And as we talk to folks, this is something that we can maybe ask in deeper questions in other surveys, is all these workforce challenges. I mean, we know from the work we do here at Eno that these issues are looming large, as Ruth said. How well transit agencies are prioritizing that and how you actually prioritize those workforce issues versus all these other things that they're facing is not entirely clear yet. But, we know that there are issues not only with them trying to recruit the kind of talent they need to take advantage of these new mobility trends and new data, new information, but just as you're pointing out, those trends around the retirements that are coming up and just these big, big shortfalls that they're starting to face. So I think whereas workforce issues in the past may have seemed way off into the future and something they could deal with when they got to it, those days are approaching. And
you make a really good point because across the world, really, the level of driver shortages now is alarming and concerning because, you miss pullouts, you have a really bad problem. And so what you're saying is the likelihood of that accelerating with, large number of retirements each year it's a very real concern.
Right.
It's already an issue.
And do you think then, so there's a bunch of questions here I'll try to collect around, particularly given what TransDev does and contracting out with transit agencies. Eno has done some work in the past few years talking about how, principles that transit agencies should use as they contract out with private firms. As it relates to workforce challenges, do you think that there's a role for contracted operations in that, or are they parallel issues, or are they totally separate? Do you think?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of reasons why, transit agencies choose to contract out part or, one of their modes or part of their modes, or sometimes all of their agencies. But I'm not sure. I think that in terms of recruiting operators and mechanics, that kind of skill, that kind of really using the technology, having it move fast, having your structure of how you train candidates and bring them in, like, it just takes a real huge on the ground effort to, I'm not sure that's any different from us doing that for one of our clients or the clients having.
Right.
Because the way we get them in the door, process them into a driver training program has changed so much in the last year because of the velocity of, we just lose people. They get another option from Amazon or whatever. So, I mean, I think the kind of continuing to put effort on that is going to be true whether you're doing it on your own or whether you've hired us or someone else to do it for you.
And so you're not necessarily losing them to other transportation or transit ops. You're losing them to totally different fields.
Yeah.
It's very interesting.
Delivery, from Whole Foods to your house. I mean, there's just so many more options for drivers today.
Yeah. There's a whole bunch of questions in here, too, that I just addressed. One, they're looking for more granularity in terms of the places, right? And so I can say that as Eno was going through the data, some of this was masked because we wanted to keep the data anonymous. And so, but we were able to kind of look through some of the geographic and population trends in these in the survey responses, and there didn't seem to be that much of a geographic difference around the country, other than, as you could probably imagine, places in the Northeast and the Midwest with older systems had concerns about deteriorated infrastructure and perhaps even larger concerns around funding challenges than places in the Intermountain West and the western part of the country in the South, which are growing, continuing to expand, and actually going to the voters to raise money for a range of transit options. And we're right about 4:30, so why don't we go ahead and stop there? I know we have a whole bunch of questions that we weren't able to get to, but I want you to note that if we didn't get to your question, I'd like you to make sure you join Eno and TransDev. We're going to do a Twitter chat on Wednesday, March 6th at 4:00 p.m. Eastern Time. You can look at we have it up on the slide now. You can use our handle at EnoTrans. You can use TransDev's handle, and you can use the hashtag TransitTrendsTalk. And we'll be taking those questions and engaging in an interactive response about this report, about the survey data, and a lot of things that we didn't get to. So we're going to collect a lot of these questions and try to repopulate those next week when we talk. This recording of this webinar and the video is going to be available on our YouTube site and on both of our websites. You can get there again on enotrans.org and by transdevna.com. Those are also up on the website. And I want to thank Ruth again and your team for your participation in all this. This has been a really interesting exercise. It's great to have this data and information and given the ability to analyze it independently.
Yeah, thank you so much. We really appreciate the partnership too. Thank you.
If folks would like more information about the work that we do here, you can check out our website at www.enotrans.org. I also want to encourage you to subscribe to Eno Transportation Weekly. It's an invaluable source to all things transportation. You can get that on our website. So again, many, many thanks for your participation. We look forward to more discussion. Have a great afternoon, everybody.